I am Alicia Walker, 67 years old, and the proud mother of my only son, Thomas. When he married Julia 5 years ago, I gifted them a beautiful heirloom dining table that could seat 12. Last month, Julia claimed there wasn't room for me at that very table during a family dinner. What she didn't know was that I'd overheard her plotting with her mother to put me in a nursing home and take my savings. The recording I made that night changed everything. Let me know where you're watching from. And subscribe if you want to hear how one clever line made my daughter-in-law leave our family for good. Life hasn't always been easy for me. I lost my husband Martin to a sudden heart attack 15 years ago, leaving me to finish raising Thomas on my own. I dedicated 35 years of my life to teaching elementary school children before retiring. And I poured everything I had into being both mother and father to Thomas after Martin passed. Thomas and I developed a special bond after his father died. He was 22 at the time, finishing up his degree in architecture at the State University. Despite his grief, he would drive the 100 miles home every Sunday for dinner. It became our sacred tradition. I would prepare his favorite pot roast with carrots and potatoes, and we would spend hours talking about his studies, his dreams, and memories of his father. As Thomas established himself in a prestigious architectural firm in the city, our traditions evolved but remained strong. When he couldn't make it home, I would drive to his apartment bringing homemade cookies and fresh groceries. We would visit museums together, sharing a mutual appreciation for beautiful design. Thomas would often call me first when he completed a new building project, eager to show me the innovative features he had incorporated. Thomas met Julia at a colleague's wedding 4 years after he started at the firm. He was the best man, and she was a friend of the bride. When he first told me about her, his eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen since before his father passed. Julia worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative. Successful, ambitious, and according to Thomas, breathtakingly beautiful. When I first met Julia at a dinner Thomas arranged at his apartment, I was genuinely impressed. She was polished and articulate with perfect blonde hair and an engaging smile. She asked thoughtful questions about my teaching career and seemed genuinely interested in our family stories. Thomas looked so happy beside her that I couldn't help but feel grateful she had come into his life. Their courtship moved quickly. Too quickly, perhaps. Within 6 months, Thomas called to tell me he had proposed and Julia had accepted. I was surprised by the speed but kept my concerns to myself. Thomas was 31. Certainly old enough to make his own decisions about love. Looking back, there were subtle signs I should have paid more attention to. When Thomas brought Julia to our Sunday dinners, she would often comment on how she could upgrade my home decor or remark about the quaint neighborhood where I'd lived for 40 years. She would check price tags when we went shopping together and steered Thomas toward unnecessarily expensive options for everything from clothes to kitchen appliances. Thomas didn't seem to notice these materialistic tendencies. He was completely captivated by Julia agreeing with her opinions and eager to please her. When I gently suggested they might want to save more for a house instead of spending so much on the wedding, Thomas dismissed my concerns. Julia deserves the best, Mom. This is her special day. The wedding planning consumed everything. Julia wanted a destination ceremony at a luxury resort in Hawaii with 100 guests flown in for a week of celebrations. I contributed a significant portion of my retirement savings to help make it happen, wanting to support my only son's happiness. Thomas never knew just how much I gave. I told him it was my gift and refused to discuss the amount. As my wedding present, I purchased an exquisite handcrafted dining table from an artisan woodworker. It was made of rich walnut with intricate inlays large enough to seat 12 people comfortably. It cost nearly $8,000, more than I had ever spent on a single item besides my house. This is for your future family gatherings, I told them at the reception. I hope to sit around it with my grandchildren someday. Julia seemed genuinely touched, running her hands over the polished surface and calling it absolutely perfect. After the honeymoon, I began to notice subtle changes in Thomas. Our weekly dinners became bi-weekly, then monthly. When they did come over, Julia would check her watch frequently or mention early appointments the next day. Thomas started calling less often, and when he did, I could hear Julia in the background asking who he was talking to or saying they needed to leave for some event. Julia became less subtle about her criticisms of me. She would helpfully suggest ways I could update my appearance, recommending expensive anti-aging creams, or offering to connect me with her hairstylist. She questioned my cooking techniques, bringing printed recipes to improve dishes I had been making for decades. Once she brought her own food to dinner, claiming she was on a special diet that my cooking couldn't accommodate. Thomas always had an excuse ready for Julia's behavior. She's just trying to help Mom. She's really stressed at work right now. You know how particular she is about food. He became the perpetual peacekeeper, smoothing over tensions but never actually addressing the growing disrespect. Despite the growing distance, I maintained my composure and tried to keep the peace. Thomas was happy, or at least he appeared to be, and that was what mattered most to me. I reminded myself that marriages need space to form their own traditions and bonds. Perhaps Julia would soften with time, especially when children came along. I held on to hope and bit my tongue, determined to preserve my relationship with my son at all costs. The first 2 years of Thomas and Julia's marriage brought a steady stream of disappointments that I tried to rationalize away. What had once been cherished, weekly dinners, dwindled to occasional visits that always seemed rushed and tense. Julia would find reasons why they couldn't stay long. A work emergency, a house showing they couldn't miss friends expecting them elsewhere. When they did visit, Julia found fault with nearly everything. My cooking was too heavy or too simple. My home was cluttered with outdated things. Even my garden, which had been my pride and joy since Martin and I first bought the house, was overgrown and old-fashioned. Each criticism felt like a small paper cut, individually bearable but increasingly painful as they accumulated. The first major blow came on my 63rd birthday. Thomas and I had always celebrated our birthdays together no matter what. Even during his college years, he would make the trip home or fly me to him if necessary. But 3 days before my birthday, Thomas called with news that Julia had surprised him with a couple's retreat that same weekend. "I'm really sorry, Mom," he said, his voice tight with what sounded like guilt. "Julia already paid for it and it's non-refundable. We'll celebrate when we get back, I promise." We never did. When they returned, Julia had scheduled a dinner with her parents, then a work function, then a home renovation project that demanded their immediate attention. My birthday gift, a scarf Julia had clearly purchased at the airport, arrived in the mail with a pre-printed card. The phone calls became less frequent too. Thomas, who used to call me several times a week just to chat, now checked in briefly every couple of weeks. When I called him, he often seemed distracted, or would whisper that he'd call me back later, a call that frequently never came. I began to notice how Julia controlled their finances and social calendar. When Thomas mentioned wanting to help me replace my aging roof, Julia quickly interjected that they were saving for a vacation home and couldn't spare the money. When I invited them to a community theater production where my former student was performing, Julia already had plans with her friends that apparently couldn't be changed. Everything changed again, momentarily for the better. When Julia announced she was pregnant with twins, Thomas was ecstatic, calling me immediately with the news. "You're going to be a grandmother, Mom," he exclaimed, sounding more like his old self than he had in years. I threw myself into grandmother preparations, knitting matching blankets, and researching the safest, most practical baby equipment. I offered to help decorate the nursery drawing on my decades of experience with children. Julia politely declined, saying they had hired a professional designer to create a modern, stimulating environment for the babies. Emily and Sarah were born on a snowy January morning. They were beautiful, perfect little girls with Thomas's dark hair and Julia's delicate features. I fell in love instantly and hoped this new chapter would bring our family closer together. Instead, Julia created new barriers. When I offered to babysit, so the exhausted new parents could rest, Julia insisted that only her mother Geraldine was familiar enough with their system to watch the twins. When I purchased educational toys based on my teaching experience, Julia mentioned they were following a specific developmental philosophy that my selections didn't align with. The first Christmas after the twins were born brought another painful disappointment. Our family had always celebrated Christmas Eve at my house, a tradition that stretched back to Martin's lifetime. But 2 weeks before the holiday, Thomas called to say they would be spending Christmas with Julia's family in Florida. "The twins are too young to travel to two places, Mom," he explained, though they were apparently not too young for a 5-hour flight to Florida. "We'll FaceTime on Christmas morning, I promise." The FaceTime call lasted less than 5 minutes before Julia announced it was time for the twins' nap. I spent Christmas Day alone looking at the unwrapped presents I had carefully selected for my granddaughters. Julia's comments about my age and abilities grew more frequent and pointed. When I picked up one of the twins, she would rush over saying, "Be careful with your back, Alicia." When I mentioned a memory from Thomas's childhood, she would exchange looks with Thomas as if concerned about my mental state. Once, I overheard her telling a friend on the phone that Thomas's mom is getting on in years and they were starting to worry about her living alone. I was 65 years old in excellent health, still driving, volunteering at my former school, and maintaining my home and garden without assistance. Yet Julia spoke about me as if I were teetering on the edge of incompetence. Through it all, Thomas remained caught in the middle, though he increasingly took Julia's side. When I expressed hurt over missed visits or limited time with the twins, he would say, "Mom, you have to understand how busy we are with 2 babies and our careers." When I defended my independence, he would say, "We're just concerned about you, that's all." I made countless attempts to connect with Julia through shared interests. I offered to teach her my grandmother's secret pie crust recipe when she mentioned wanting to bake more. I suggested we take the twins to the Children's Museum together when she complained about being bored at home. I even tried to engage with her interest in interior design, asking for her opinion on new curtains for my living room. Each overture was politely but firmly deflected. The loneliness was often overwhelming. Most of my friends had moved away to be closer to their own children and grandchildren, or to retire in warmer climates. Some had passed away. My identity had been so wrapped up in being a mother and teacher that without those roles fully accessible to me, I sometimes felt invisible. Still, I refused to give up. These were my only grandchildren, my only son. I would endure whatever slights and disappointments necessary to remain in their lives. I just never imagined how much worse things would get. The twins' first birthday marked a turning point in Julia's campaign against me. During the extravagant party at their house, to which I was invited only after inquiring if they were planning a celebration, Julia cornered me in the kitchen while I was rinsing dishes. "Thomas and I have been talking," she said, leaning against the counter with casual confidence. "This house is really too big for you now that you're alone. Have you thought about downsizing to something more manageable?" I was startled by the directness of her suggestion. "I love my home," I replied simply. "It's where Thomas grew up, where Martin and I built our life together." "Sentimentality is expensive," Julia said with a thin smile. "And dangerous. What if you fell on those steep stairs? Who would help you?" Before I could respond, Thomas joined us in the kitchen. "Mom, Julia's just thinking practically," he said clearly, having discussed this with her beforehand. "There are some really nice retirement communities not far from here. We could look at them together sometime." The idea that my 34-year-old son thought I needed a retirement community at 66 was both hurtful and absurd. I changed the subject, but the seed of worry had been planted. Was this a coincidence, or the beginning of a larger plan? Over the next several months, Julia's mother Geraldine became an increasingly frequent presence at family gatherings. Unlike her daughter, who maintained at least a veneer of politeness, Geraldine made little effort to hide her disdain for me. She would talk over me, dismiss my opinions, and make comments about old-fashioned parenting when I interacted with the twins. More concerning were the hushed conversations I began to notice between Julia Thomas and sometimes Geraldine. Once, while retrieving my purse from Thomas's home office during a visit, I overheard Julia asking Thomas detailed questions about my finances. "Does she still have the money from selling your father's business? What about her teacher's pension? Has she updated her will since you got married?" Thomas's responses were too quiet to hear clearly, but the direction of their interest was unmistakable. A week later, Julia called with an unexpected offer. Alicia, I know managing finances can get confusing as we get older, she said sweetly. Thomas and I would be happy to help organize your retirement accounts. My cousin is a financial advisor and he gives family discounts. I thanked her but declined firmly, explaining that my longtime accountant handled everything perfectly well. Julia's tone cooled immediately, and she ended the call shortly after. That summer brought another painful incident. Thomas had mentioned a family vacation to a lakeside cabin, and I had expressed delight at the idea of spending quality time with the twins, now 18 months old. I purchased new swimsuits and water toys for the girls, and even a new digital camera to capture memories. 3 days before the trip, Thomas called. "Mom, I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to uninvite you from the lake trip," he said, sounding genuinely regretful. Julia's mother had a minor surgery, and she needs to recover somewhere peaceful. Since we already rented the cabin, you're taking Geraldine instead. I finished for him, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. It's just that she doesn't have anyone else, Thomas explained weakly. And the cabin only has 3 bedrooms. I didn't point out that I would have happily shared a room with the twins. I didn't mention that Geraldine had 3 sisters living within 20 miles of her house. I simply said I understood and wished them a good trip. The photos posted on social media showed Geraldine looking remarkably spry for someone recovering from surgery, swimming and kayaking with the family. In none of the dozens of pictures did I see any bandages or signs of a recent medical procedure. Julia's complaints about my supposed health issues and the burden I placed on the family became more frequent and less private. At a neighborhood barbecue that Thomas had reluctantly invited me to, I overheard Julia telling a group of their friends that they were constantly checking on my mother-in-law and worried about her driving at night. This was particularly infuriating, as I had perfect vision, had never had an accident, and had recently passed my driving test with a perfect score. When I mentioned this to Thomas later, he shrugged uncomfortably. "Julia just worries about you, Mom. We both do." My 67th birthday brought another slight. Thomas organized a dinner at a nice restaurant, but Julia managed to cut the celebration short by developing a sudden severe migraine just as dessert was being served. Thomas rushed her home while I paid the bill they had left behind. I found myself increasingly isolated from family events. The twins' preschool recital, Thomas's firm's holiday party, even casual Sunday brunches. I would learn about these gatherings through Thomas's social media posts or casual mentions after the fact. When I asked why I hadn't been included, there was always an excuse. The event was adults, only there had been limited tickets. They thought I was busy that day. I noticed Thomas becoming more irritable and stressed around me. Where he had once been patient with my stories or questions about the twins, he now checked his phone constantly and found reasons to cut visits short. Julia had successfully positioned me as a burden, and Thomas was beginning to see me through that distorted lens. A particularly painful incident occurred when I visited their home and noticed that my wedding photo with Martin, which had always sat on a side table in their living room, was missing. When I asked about it, Julia claimed it had been accidentally damaged during cleaning. She never replaced it, and the space was soon filled with a new photo of her parents. During a quick stop at their house to drop off Christmas presents, I used the guest bathroom and discovered a pamphlet about recognizing early signs of dementia tucked behind the towels. My hands shook as I read the highlighted passages about irritability and resistance to change. Was Julia planning to suggest I was cognitively impaired? The twins' 3rd birthday party brought another humiliation. Despite helping Julia's mother Geraldine with party preparations all morning, when it came time for lunch, I discovered I had been seated at a small table in the corner with the teenage servers Julia had hired. My granddaughters were surrounded by Julia's friends and family while I watched from a distance. Most alarming was overhearing Julia tell her neighbor that I was becoming quite forgetful lately, and they were keeping a close eye on the situation. This was an outright lie. My memory was excellent, and I prided myself on never missing a birthday or anniversary. As the months passed, I began to fear for my independence and my relationship with my son and granddaughters. Julia was methodically painting me as incompetent and burdensome, while positioning herself and her mother as the only reasonable caregivers for the twins. I needed to be vigilant, but I had no idea how serious the situation would soon become. The invitation came unexpectedly on a Tuesday afternoon. Thomas called sounding more like his old self than he had in months. "Mom, I got a big promotion at work. We're having a small dinner celebration on Friday, and we want you to be there." I was touched and excited, both by Thomas's success and the rare invitation to their home. "That's wonderful news, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." "Of course I'll be there. Can I bring anything?" "Just yourself," Thomas said warmly. "Julia's handling everything." Despite this instruction, I couldn't arrive empty-handed for such a special occasion. I spent Thursday baking Thomas's favorite dessert, a triple chocolate cake with raspberry filling just like I'd made for his birthdays growing up. I also purchased a beautiful pen set I knew he'd appreciate for client meetings, and a bottle of the champagne we'd toasted with when he graduated from university. I arrived 30 minutes early on Friday, hoping to help with any last-minute preparations. Julia answered the door with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Alicia, you're early." She made no move to invite me in until I shifted the cake box in my arms. The house was filled with delicious smells and the sound of voices from the kitchen. When I followed Julia inside, I discovered her mother Geraldine arranging flowers on the dining table, my wedding gift table, which was already set with Julia's best china and crystal. "I brought Thomas's favorite cake," I said, holding out the box. "And some champagne to celebrate." Julia took the cake with a small frown. "Oh, we already have a catered dessert selection coming, and we're serving wine, not champagne. But I suppose we can put this in the kitchen." As she carried my cake away, I noticed something concerning about the table. It was set for exactly 7 people: Thomas, Julia, the twins Geraldine, and Julia's father Gerald, who was chatting with Thomas in the living room. There was no place for me. When the catering staff arrived with the final dishes, Julia directed everyone to take their seats. I stood awkwardly watching as they all found their place cards. "Julia," I said quietly, "there doesn't seem to be a setting for me." She glanced at the table with practiced surprise. "Oh, I thought we discussed this. There's just not enough room at the table with the serving platters and centerpiece. I've set a lovely place for you in the kitchen nook. It's actually the best seat, right by the window with the garden view." I stared at her in disbelief. Not enough room. At a 12-person table with 7 people. Thomas looked up, finally noticing the situation. "Mom, it's just for tonight. The caterers need space to serve." I looked around at the table I had given them. The table that symbolized my hope for family gatherings where everyone would be welcome. The centerpiece was modest, the serving platters standard-sized. There was easily room for 3 more place settings. "Julia, I can easily fit at the table," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We just need to move things slightly." "Everything is arranged exactly as the caterer recommended," Julia said firmly. "Thomas, tell your mother it's not a big deal. The kitchen nook is perfectly comfortable." Thomas gave me a pleading look. "Mom, please. Let's not make a scene. It's just for tonight." I felt my face flush with humiliation, but years of practicing patience helped me maintain my composure. "Of course. I understand." The kitchen nook turned out to be a small desk, where Julia normally paid bills hastily cleared with a TV tray set up for my plate. It was around the corner from the dining room, out of sight of everyone else. I could hear the conversation and laughter, but couldn't participate. The caterer looked embarrassed as she brought me a plate. "Would you like me to serve you the wine, ma'am?" she asked kindly. "Yes, please," I said quietly. "And could you tell my son I'll be right back? I need to use the restroom." Instead of using the powder room near the kitchen, I walked upstairs where it would be quieter. As I passed the partially open door of Julia's home office, I heard her voice inside speaking in hushed but intense tones. "Mom, we need to accelerate the timeline. She's becoming more difficult." I froze, then carefully moved closer to the door. "I agree," came Geraldine's voice. "Has Thomas agreed to the power of attorney paperwork yet?" "He's hesitating," Julia replied, frustration evident in her tone. "He keeps saying she's perfectly capable of managing her own affairs. But I've been planting seeds." mentioning little incidents of forgetfulness, pointing out how tired she looks living alone in that big house. "The nursing home I found in Meadowbrook has a waiting list," Geraldine said. "We need to get a deposit down soon if we want a spot this year. Their memory care unit is top-rated." "Memory care unit, I don't have any memory problems," I thought, my heart beginning to pound. "I've been looking at her finances," Julia continued. "The house is worth at least $400,000 in this market. With her savings and pension, there's enough to cover the nursing home costs and still give us a substantial down payment on the lake house." "Has she updated her will since Thomas got married?" Geraldine asked. "Not yet. That's next on my list. I've drafted some documents for Thomas to discuss with her. Once we have power of attorney, we can handle most of it without directly involving her." I felt physically ill. They were planning to declare me incompetent, take control of my finances, sell my home, and place me in a nursing home, all while using my money to buy themselves a vacation property. "We need to document her confusion," Geraldine suggested. "Next time she misplaces something or forgets a detail, record it on your phone. Build a case file." My friend Deborah did that with her mother-in-law. Showed the doctor a whole collection of incidents. Had her declared incompetent within a month. "That's brilliant," Julia said. "I've already told the neighbors and Thomas's colleagues that we're concerned about her cognitive state. Setting the groundwork." "She's a burden, Julia. All these visits having to include her in plans. Once she's in Meadowbrook, you'll have your life back. And that house of hers can finally be sold." "I know," Julia sighed. "I'm just tired of pretending to care about her stories and opinions. She's had her life. Now it's our turn. Thomas will see it's for the best once it's done." "Speaking of Thomas," Geraldine said, "we should get back downstairs before he wonders where you are." "1 minute," Julia replied. "I want to check on Alicia. Make sure she's not making a fuss about being in the kitchen. The last thing we need is her creating drama on Thomas's special night." With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and quickly hit record, placing it just inside my jacket pocket with the microphone exposed. Then I hurried back toward the kitchen, my mind racing. This was no longer about petty slights or family tension. This was a coordinated plan to take everything from me: my home, my savings, my independence, and my relationship with my son and grandchildren. All based on lies about my mental competence. I had just settled back at the small desk when Julia appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Everything okay in here?" she asked with artificial sweetness. "Do you need anything?" I looked up at my daughter-in-law. This woman who had systematically worked to isolate me from my family and was now plotting to institutionalize me and summoned a calm I didn't feel. "Actually, Julia, I was just thinking how revealing seating arrangements can be," I said pleasantly. "They show exactly what someone values and how they truly see their family members. Don't you agree?" Julia's smile faltered slightly. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," I replied, maintaining eye contact. "And I think you should know that walls in this house are thinner than you might realize. Conversations carry, especially when people think no one is listening." The color drained from Julia's face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying enjoy your dinner, Julia. I'll be speaking with Thomas tomorrow, privately." For once, my daughter-in-law was speechless. She turned and hurried back to the dining room, throwing a worried glance over her shoulder. I sat alone in the kitchen, the recorded conversation safely captured on my phone, and finished my meal with newfound determination. The game had changed, and for the first time in years I held the upper hand. Sleep eluded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Julia and Geraldine's voices planning my institutionalization as casually as one might discuss a vacation itinerary. By dawn, I had replayed the recording dozens of times, confirming that it clearly captured their entire scheme. My first call was to Barbara Stevens, my closest friend and a retired attorney who had specialized in elder law. We had taught together for 20 years before she changed careers in her 40s. If anyone would know how to handle this situation legally and effectively, it would be Barbara. "Those conniving witches," Barbara exclaimed after listening to the recording. "This is elder abuse, Alicia. Financial exploitation and psychological abuse. We could go to the police." I don't want to do that to Thomas, I said. He's being manipulated too. I need to talk to him first, make him understand what's happening. Barbara reluctantly agreed but gave me clear advice on how to proceed. The recording is legal because you were in a residence where you had permission to be, and you weren't a part of the private conversation. You overheard it. But approach Thomas carefully. People can be defensive when they learn their spouse is not who they thought. I texted Thomas that morning asking if we could meet for lunch to discuss something important. To my relief, he agreed readily, suggesting our old favorite diner halfway between our homes. I arrived early and secured a quiet booth in the back. Thomas arrived looking tired, but gave me a genuine smile as he slid into the seat across from me. "What's this about, Mom? Is everything okay? You seemed quiet last night." I took a deep breath. "Thomas, I need to tell you something difficult, and I need you to listen completely before you respond. Can you promise me that?" His expression grew concerned. "Of course. What's wrong?" Last night, while using the upstairs bathroom, I overheard a conversation between Julia and her mother that has me deeply worried. I kept my voice steady, making eye contact. They were discussing plans to have me declared incompetent, obtain power of attorney over my finances, place me in a nursing home, and use my money to buy your lake house. Thomas's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then defensive anger. "Mom, that's ridiculous. You must have misunderstood. Julia would never do something like that." I had anticipated this reaction. "I understand this is difficult to hear, but I need you to listen to something." I placed my phone on the table between us. "This is a recording of their conversation." "You recorded them, Mom. That's invading their privacy." "I recorded them after I overheard them planning to take everything from me," I said firmly. "Please, just listen." Reluctantly, Thomas put in the earbud I offered. I watched his expression change as Julia and Geraldine's voices filled his ear, first skeptical, then confused, and finally, as the conversation continued, genuinely shocked. By the time the recording ended, with Julia saying she was tired of pretending to care about me, Thomas's hands were shaking. "This can't be real," he whispered, but the conviction had drained from his voice. "It is real, Thomas, and there's more you should know." I told him about the pamphlets on dementia I'd found, the lies Julia had been telling neighbors about my mental state, and the steady campaign to isolate me from family events. As I spoke, Thomas's expression grew increasingly troubled. "She's been telling me you're showing signs of memory problems," he admitted. "Small things. Forgetting conversations we supposedly had, mixing up dates. I've been worried about you." "None of that happened, Thomas. I've never been confused or forgetful during our conversations. Julia has been lying to you." Thomas pulled out his own phone and dialed Julia's number, putting it on speaker. "Hey, babe," Julia answered cheerfully. "Julia, I'm with my mom right now," Thomas said, his voice controlled but tight. "She's just played me a recording of you and your mother discussing plans to put her in a nursing home and take her money." There was a long pause before Julia responded, her voice suddenly syrupy with concern. "Thomas, sweetie, what are you talking about? Is your mom confused again? You know how she gets sometimes, imagining things." "The recording is very clear, Julia. I heard everything. The nursing home in Meadowbrook using her money for our lake house, building a case file of supposed memory issues. Were you planning to tell me any of this?" "Thomas, I don't know what recording she's showing you, but it must be manipulated or taken out of context. You know, I only want what's best for your mother. We've talked about how living alone isn't safe for her anymore. You told your mother you were tired of pretending to care about my mom's stories and opinions, that she's had her life and now it's our turn." Another pause. "I need to see this supposed recording. Your mother has clearly misunderstood something or is trying to cause problems between us. You know how she's been lately." "Email me the recording," Mom, Thomas said, his jaw clenched. I did so immediately, and within seconds his phone dinged with the received file. "I'll be home in 20 minutes, Thomas told Julia. "We need to talk about this. And call your mother. I want her there too." He ended the call before she could respond. Thomas sat in silence for a moment, staring at his coffee. I can't believe this, he finally said. All this time I thought she was looking out for both of us. For our whole family. She's been very strategic, Thomas. Making small comments, planting doubts, isolating me gradually. She's been pushing me to get power of attorney over your finances for months, Thomas admitted. Said it was for your protection in case something happened to you. God, Mom, I almost went along with it. He pulled out his tablet and logged into his email. There's something you should see. He turned the screen toward me, showing an email from Julia to a doctor I'd never heard of. She scheduled a cognitive assessment for you next month without telling you, Thomas explained, his voice hollow. And look at the attached intake form. The form was filled with fabricated symptoms, claims that I frequently got lost while driving, forgot family members' names, left burners on, and had episodes of confusion. All complete lies. I'm so sorry, Mom, Thomas said, his eyes filling with tears. I should have seen what was happening. I let her come between us, let her treat you terribly. You're seeing it now, I said, reaching across the table to take his hand. That's what matters. We need to confront her, Thomas said, a hardness entering his voice I'd never heard before. Tonight. Together. I want to hear her try to explain this. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Thomas hugged me tightly. I love you, Mom. I'm going to fix this, I promise. For the first time in years, I felt my son truly seeing me again, not through Julia's distorted lens, but as his mother who loved him unconditionally. Whatever happened next, that alone was a victory worth celebrating. Thomas picked me up from my house at precisely 7 o'clock that evening. His face was set in grim determination as he held the car door for me. Julia doesn't know you're coming, he said as we drove toward his home. I told her we needed to have a serious discussion and her mother should be there. She's been calling and texting me all afternoon, but I've only responded with brief messages. I nodded, my heart pounding with anxiety, but also a sense of long overdue justice. What about the twins? They're upstairs with a movie. Once everyone is there, I'll ask my neighbor Lisa to come over and take them to her house for ice cream. They don't need to witness this. When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed Geraldine's luxury SUV already parked at the curb. Thomas squeezed my hand reassuringly before we walked to the door. Julia answered her practiced smile, faltering when she saw me standing beside Thomas. Alicia, I didn't realize you were joining us. Her voice was high and brittle. My mother is absolutely part of this conversation, Thomas said, firmly guiding me past Julia into the house. Geraldine was perched on the edge of the sofa in the living room, her expression pinched with annoyance that transformed to alarm when I entered. Thomas asked us all to sit, then texted his neighbor. Within minutes, Lisa arrived to collect Emily and Sarah, who squealed with excitement about their unexpected ice cream adventure. Once the front door closed behind the twins, Thomas stood in the center of the living room. From where I sat, I could see the dining room and the beautiful table that had become a symbol of my exclusion from the family. I want to understand exactly what's going on, Thomas began, his voice controlled but tense. Mom played me a recording today that disturbed me deeply. I've sent both of you the file. Perhaps you should listen to it before we continue. Julia and Geraldine exchanged nervous glances as Thomas forwarded the recording to them. We sat in uncomfortable silence as they listened through their phones. Julia's face paled while Geraldine's flushed with anger. This is an invasion of privacy, Geraldine snapped when the recording ended. Your mother had no right to record a private conversation. That's what concerns you, Thomas asked, incredulously. Not the fact that you were planning to institutionalize my mother against her will and steal her money. You're taking this completely out of context, Julia interjected, her voice taking on the condescending tone she often used when speaking to me. We were discussing options for Alicia's care when the time comes. You know we've all been worried about her memory issues and safety. What memory issues, Julia? I asked directly. Name one actual incident where I've shown any cognitive impairment. Just last month you forgot about our dinner plans, Julia said quickly. And you've mixed up the twins' names several times. We didn't have dinner plans last month, I replied calmly. You canceled our standing lunch date, but we never rescheduled for dinner. And I've never confused the girls' names. Unlike your father, who still calls them the twins because he can't tell them apart. Thomas pulled out his tablet again. I found the cognitive assessment paperwork, Julia. The one you filled out with completely fabricated symptoms. And the emails to Meadowbrook Nursing Home inquiring about their memory care unit costs and availability. Julia's composure cracked slightly. Thomas, your mother is getting older. We need to be prepared. I was just researching options for the future. The recording makes your intentions very clear, Thomas said coldly. You called my mother a burden. You said, and I quote, "She's had her life now, it's our turn." You discussed selling her house and using her money for our lake house. It wasn't like that, Julia insisted, tears welling in her eyes. Your mother clearly misunderstood a hypothetical discussion. Stop lying, Julia, Thomas said, his voice rising for the first time. I heard it myself. You and your mother were planning to declare my mother incompetent so you could control her finances. Geraldine suddenly shifted tactics. Julia was only following my suggestions, she said, throwing her daughter under the bus without hesitation. I may have pushed too hard based on my experience with my own mother's decline. Julia was just being a dutiful daughter. Julia gaped at her mother in shock. Mom! I watched this performance with a strange sense of detachment. After years of subtle psychological warfare, seeing their true colors displayed so openly was almost cathartic. There's more, Thomas continued, pulling papers from his briefcase. After our lunch today, I went to my office and did some investigating. I found documents on our shared drive that I never created or signed. A draft power of attorney, a petition for guardianship, even a listing agreement for Mom's house with a future date. Julia's artificial tears dried up instantly. You went through my private files. They were on our family drive, Julia. Along with this. He held up a spreadsheet. A detailed accounting of my mother's assets and how they could be liquidated, with projections of how much would be left over after nursing home costs to put toward our lake house down payment. A tense silence filled the room. Through the archway, I could see my reflection in the dining room mirror. A woman who had been nearly erased from her own family but was now reclaiming her place. Thomas, you're blowing this out of proportion, Julia tried again, reaching for his hand. He pulled away. I don't think I am. In fact, I don't think I fully understood what's been happening in our marriage until today. This isn't just about my mother. It's about who you really are. A noise on the stairs drew our attention. Emily and Sarah stood on the landing in their pajamas, looking confused and worried. Daddy, why is everyone yelling? Emily asked. Julia immediately rushed to the stairs, her demeanor instantly transforming. Sweethearts, I thought you were having ice cream with Lisa. We did, but Lisa had to go help her husband with something, Sarah explained. She brought us back and said to tell you we're ready for bedtime stories. Thomas moved toward the girls. Everything's okay. Grandma and I are just having an important talk with Mommy and Grandma Geraldine. Julia tried to use the children as a shield, wrapping her arms around them. We'll finish this discussion later, Thomas. The girls need their bedtime routine. I stood up, speaking directly to my granddaughters. Emily, Sarah, would you like Grandma Alicia to read your bedtime story tonight? I haven't done that in a very long time. The girls nodded enthusiastically, slipping from Julia's grasp and running to hug me. Julia's face contorted with barely concealed rage. I'll take them up, I said to Thomas. You finish what you need to discuss. As I guided the twins upstairs, I heard Thomas say firmly, Julia, I want you to pack a bag and stay with your parents for a while. I need time to think about our future. You can't be serious. Julia's voice rose sharply. You're choosing your mother over your wife and children. I'm choosing honesty and decency, Thomas replied. The girls are staying here with me. From the top of the stairs, I heard Geraldine's hasty departure, abandoning her daughter to face the consequences alone. I focused on reading to my granddaughters, giving them the attention and love they deserved while the confrontation continued downstairs. After 2 stories, Thomas came up to kiss the girls goodnight. Mommy's going to stay with Grandma Geraldine for a little while, he explained gently. Everything's going to be fine. When we returned downstairs, Julia was in the entryway with a hastily packed suitcase, her face a mask of cold fury. "This isn't over, Thomas," she said. "Think carefully about what you're doing to our family." As she yanked open the front door, she turned to me with a final barb. "Enjoy your victory, Alicia. I hope controlling your son is worth destroying his marriage." I met her gaze steadily. "Julia, the only person who destroyed anything here is you. I never wanted anything but to love my son and granddaughters. You were the one who tried to erase me from their lives." Julia stormed out, slamming the door behind her. In the sudden silence, Thomas and I looked at each other, both exhausted but somehow lighter. The truth had finally been spoken aloud, and with it came the first step toward healing our fractured family. The days following Julia's departure were filled with difficult conversations and painful revelations. Thomas apologized repeatedly for his blindness to Julia's manipulation and the hurt I had endured. "I should have seen it," he said as we sat at his kitchen table the next morning. "All those times she isolated you, the comments about your health and memory making you eat in the kitchen. I let it happen because it was easier than confronting her. You loved her, Thomas. We often don't see the flaws in people we love until we're forced to look." I stayed at Thomas's house that first week, helping with the twins who were confused and upset by their mother's sudden absence. We explained in age-appropriate terms that Mommy and Daddy needed some time apart to work through adult problems. "Is it because Mommy made Grandma eat in the kitchen?" Emily asked, with the startling perception of a 4-year-old. "Lisa's grandma always sits at their table." Thomas knelt to her level. "It's more complicated than that, sweetheart. But part of it is about treating all our family members with respect and kindness." As the initial shock faded, Thomas began uncovering more of Julia's deceptions: hidden financial accounts, where she had been siphoning money from their joint savings, emails with attorneys exploring how to gain control of my assets, conversations with a real estate agent about listing my house, all without my knowledge or consent. She had a whole separate life. I knew nothing about, Thomas confessed, looking shell-shocked as he showed me the evidence. A life focused on money and status, with no regard for the people she was hurting. Julia made several attempts to regain control of the narrative. She sent mutual friends to plead her case, claiming I had manipulated Thomas with false accusations and doctored recordings. She filed for emergency custody of the twins, claiming Thomas was under undue influence from his mentally unstable mother. The custody hearing was a turning point. When Julia's attorney suggested I had cognitive impairments, Thomas presented the falsified medical forms and the recording of Julia and Geraldine's plotting. The judge was visibly disturbed by the evidence and awarded Thomas temporary full custody, with Julia granted supervised visitation twice weekly. "Your wife's attempts to falsely claim her mother-in-law is incompetent raise serious concerns about her judgment and character," the judge stated. "This court does not look kindly on elder exploitation or false allegations of mental incapacity." With the legal matters temporarily settled, Thomas and I focused on rebuilding our relationship and creating stability for the twins. We had long, honest conversations about how we had drifted apart and how to strengthen our bond moving forward. I enabled Julia's behavior, Thomas admitted during one particularly emotional discussion. "I chose peace over standing up for you. I'll never make that mistake again." "We both made mistakes," I told him gently. "I should have been more direct about how I was feeling instead of suffering in silence." 3 months after the confrontation, I found a lovely apartment in a senior living community just 2 miles from Thomas's house. It wasn't the nursing home Julia had planned for me, but a vibrant, independent living complex where I could have my own space while staying close to my family. "Are you sure about this?" Mom Thomas asked as he helped me move in. "You know you're welcome to stay with us as long as you want." "I'm sure," I said, arranging photos of the twins on my new mantle. "You and the girls need space to heal, and I need my independence. But this time we'll stay connected." We established new traditions: Sunday dinners at my apartment, where I taught the twins to make the same recipes I had once taught Thomas. Unlike the tension-filled visits of the past, these gatherings were filled with laughter and genuine connection. 6 months after our confrontation, we learned that Julia had become engaged to Harold Winters, a wealthy widower 30 years her senior. Thomas wasn't surprised. "She's found her next target," he said with a sad shake of his head. I almost feel like I should warn him. The divorce proceedings were finalized after Julia agreed to a settlement in exchange for Thomas not pursuing charges related to her financial manipulations and attempted elder abuse. She maintained her twice-weekly supervised visitations with the twins, but showed decreasing interest as her new relationship progressed. My own healing journey took time. I joined a support group for seniors who had experienced family estrangement or elder abuse, finding strength in sharing my story and helping others recognize the warning signs I had missed. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish, I often told new members of the group. It's necessary for your well-being and dignity. I also volunteered with a senior advocacy organization helping educate older adults about protecting themselves from financial exploitation and recognizing psychological abuse. My experience with Julia gave me unique insight into how gradually and subtly such manipulation could occur. Thomas underwent his own transformation. He attended therapy to understand how he had been manipulated and why he had failed to protect me. He became more assertive, more aware of his own boundaries, and more deliberate in his parenting. A year after Julia left, Thomas mentioned he had met someone at a school fundraiser, Diane, a kindergarten teacher, with a warm smile and genuine interest in his daughters. Unlike his whirlwind courtship with Julia, Thomas took this relationship slowly, carefully observing how Diane interacted with both the twins and me. The first time Diane joined us for Sunday dinner, she insisted I take the seat at the head of the table. "This is your tradition," she said simply. "I'm honored to be included." That Christmas, our second without Julia, we gathered at my apartment for a celebration that felt like a true homecoming. Thomas had brought a small dining table from his house to extend mine, ensuring everyone had a place. Emily and Sarah had helped me decorate cookies and make ornaments proudly showing Diane their creations. As I looked around at my son, my granddaughters, and this kind woman who treated them with genuine love, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. The painful chapter with Julia had taught us all valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation, standing up for ourselves, and the importance of honest communication. Later that evening, as Thomas and I washed dishes while Diane helped the twins build a fort in the living room, he turned to me with tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry for everything that happened, Mom. But I'm also grateful that we found our way back to each other." I hugged him tightly. "Family isn't about perfect harmony, Thomas. It's about loving each other through the hard times and growing stronger together. Real love doesn't diminish anyone. It elevates everyone." As I reflect on our journey, I realize that Julia's cruelty ultimately failed to achieve its purpose. Instead of destroying our family, it forced us to rebuild it on a stronger foundation of truth, respect, and genuine care. The dining table that once symbolized my exclusion has been replaced by one where everyone has a place, not because of obligation, but because of love. If you've ever felt pushed aside or manipulated by someone who should have cared for you, I hope my story gives you courage. It's never too late to reclaim your voice and your rightful place. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who tried to diminish your worth? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and share with someone who might need to hear that they deserve a seat at the table. Thank you for listening, and remember, your age doesn't determine your value. Your presence matters.